So this so this is the first night of the winter solstice, unlocking something richer, a solstice workshop on repair, lineage, and eliminating anti-Blackness. We're gonna start at 6 and we're gonna end hopefully around we definitely want to get out of here before 8 p.m. my time, which is 9 p.m. Mary's time. All right, EST. And I want to start with just grounding us in the understanding that we are living, and what I've been telling people is absolutely not unprecedented. All right, so that's the first. But even if there's lots of precedent for what we're experiencing in the United States and the West, but globally, it also is very apocalyptic. And I think we can hold both of those tensions. Certainly in this moment is the first time in my life where I feel actively fearful that I'm going to lose the right to vote, right? This is the first time in my life that I am teaching students, um, women students, birthing people who don't have access to abortion care, right? So there are some things that I'm experiencing that I've never experienced before, all right. So I do want to name that while there's plenty of precedent for the there's plenty of precedent for this authoritativism, the fascism, all of the violent systems and ideologies that are fusing right now, it still creates the kind of physical, spiritual, mental experience that can exhaust us. So I just want to hold that, acknowledge that we are having this conversation at a time where ICE has just moved into my state. We're having this conversation at a time where there's not one genocidal project happening, but multiple, right? And so I would be foolish not to acknowledge that that weight sits with us, some of us in different ways, but we're here. And it is in knowing what we're experiencing that I offer this course really humbly, because I do think it's gonna give us some grounding necessarily for the time ahead. All right. For people who are new to my facilitation, I do feel like it's important to give an introduction and to set some realistic expectations of me as a facilitator. All right. So I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Black woman who is a descendant of enslaved folks who lives in South Louisiana. I did grow up in New York City. And so I tell people I'm a Yankee Southern hybrid. I know exactly what's happening above the Mason-Dixon line and below the Mason-Dixon line. I've had that experience. I'm an educator. I have been teaching communication studies. Well, I'm going out of flow. So, the three reasons why I have the embodied knowledge to lead this workshop. Let's start with my lived experience. So, I told you that I'm a Black woman. I live in the South. I'm a descendant of enslaved people. And I hold inside of me the knowledge of identity, the ancestral wisdom. I tell people all the time that I did not grow up in the Jim Crow South, but I was in the body of a woman who did. And so I epigenetically know what does it mean to be displaced? What does it mean to, because that's what I want more people to understand and have the language around. We use the term Great Migration here in the United States to talk about Black people, mostly who were the descendants of enslaved folks, having to flee the South to go to the North to avoid the KKK and Jim Crow. And I really want us to start to contextualize that as more than just, oh, the Great Migration. We're talking about a displaced group of people having to move to survive, right? So I actually use the language of great displacement when I talk about that that migration pattern for survival. All right. And then the last, but always the least important reason why I'm qualified to lead this conversation is that I have formal education in communication studies. So I've been studying identity, I've been studying social movements, I've been studying power and rhetoric, and intercultural competencies now for roughly about 25 years. All right. So those are all the three reasons why I feel situated to have this conversation. Um, and now what I would like to do is invite you all to take a second and think about what is it that has brought you into this room tonight. All right. I want you to hold it in your head for a second. That's that first kind of discussion question is what brought you in the room tonight? Once you hold it in your head for a second, I want you to bring that to your heart and think about what does it feel to be in this room tonight? All right? I'm going to ask you to write that down, but I don't want you to share it right now because I'm going to get you to share that later on when we're not recording, okay? But I want to give you an opportunity to think about what are you bringing into the room tonight, your why, and then what are you feeling, all right? So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to write that down, hold it in your head, bring it to your heart, and then we're going to go with the rest of tonight's agenda. What are you bringing in the room? And what are you feeling in the room? Okay. I'm so sorry. I apologize, y'all, because usually what I ask at the top of the meeting is that can everyone hear me, see me? Does anyone need something from me that would make it easier for them to communicate with me or receive my communication? All right. If you need any additional support for accessibility, please feel free to private message me because I want to make sure that everyone has what they need to learn the things they would like to learn in this space. All right, I'm giving you all 1 more minute. If you need more than 1 more minute, you need to message me and say, Kina, hold up.
Kina, will you stop recording when people start sharing?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay, that was just my
But
general.
we're not gonna share out until we get to the discussion part part of this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I wanted you to capture this before I get into all of the goodies. I
Yeah.
sort of want like a pre and post.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay. So I figured we'd start tonight with me sharing one, my embodied knowledge that informs why I'm leading this conversation. Two, what is my personal connection to the subject matter? And then three, I'm going to share a little bit about my teaching style. I'm very fortunate to have people who've taken courses with me for years in this space, but also we're really excited to see new people. All right. So, because we have some new people in the village, I felt like it was important to be clear about how I lead spaces like this. But let's start with the why I felt like it was important to have this conversation and my own personal connection to this. So I would say, I guess, roughly about 2 years ago, a tremendous sister friend by the name of Brittany Janae, who I got introduced to her work years ago because she is the brilliant Black creator behind something called Liberated Love Notes, critical self-reflections and affirmations for the culture. And so it's a deck, a beautiful deck of affirmations for Black folk, right? So I got introduced to her work years ago, and I'm very blessed that we were able to create a community, chosen community and friendship. And so she and I were just doing a sister check-in a few years ago. And I don't know, I was probably in the depths of despair, which is the place I'm at often, and just really feeling lost. And I remember her asking me, roughly, basically, have you checked in with your ancestors? And I was like, huh? What? What do you say? She was like, yeah, because this moment requires something bigger than you, right? And in that moment, I was like, you're right. She's like, you need to draw from a specific like body of wisdom that's bigger than yourself. And because I still believe and listen to Black women, I was like, say less, right? And so I went about creating an ancestor board of directors. And it was actually relatively easy for me to do this because without even knowing, I had already started compiling this list in my head of cultural ancestors who meant a great deal to me, right? So, for example, anyone who's been following my work for a long time know that I often name Malcolm X as a patron saint of mine. I have this beautiful photo of him. It's actually one of the, I would say probably one of the most famous poses of portraits of him, where he's standing. Um, I'll just have to send y'all a photo of the picture, but basically he's standing by a window with this long ass gun, like looking outside the window, like, listen, do I have to pop a cap in someone's ass? And I've just always drawn a lot of strength from him. And so, anyway, I'm a little squirrely here. So that picture of Malcolm with the gun, like, is literally facing my back door. So I'm like, if somebody ever breaks in, the first thing they're gonna see is Malcolm with the gun, and hopefully that would be enough to deter them, right? And so I created the board, and in the last 2 years, it's been a really not only just a grounding tool for me, but it's actually been an essential component of uh my who am I listening to in this moment, right? And I'll just give you a slight example. That's the picture, Charlotte. Thank you. That is the
You're
picture.
welcome. I had to find it.
Yeah, that's sitting at the back door. So it made sense that Malcolm X was going to be on my ancestral board of directors. But I'm going to give you a specific um, use of this board. Last year, once we got the news of the return of 47 to the White House and all of the feelings that that moment created, I had to make a professional decision about if I were going to remove the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion from my branding, my websites, right? As a DEI consultant and strategist, so many of my fellow colleagues were like, we got to scrub it. We got to take all the DEI stuff off, remove it from the website, new language, right? Because we knew exactly what kind of political moment we were about to experience. So I got very confused about what was the best thing to do, right? Um, yeah, there was a part of me that felt like I needed to do what I saw a lot of my peers doing to play it safe. But then my Sag, the Sag in me was like, why would we do that? Right. So this is Sag season right now. Just want everybody to know about it. Your girl's gonna officially be half of a lifetime tomorrow. But again, a squirrel again, I'm digressing. So with that being said, thank you, Charlotte. Uh so I went to the board, and one of the people who's in my ancestral board of directors is Ida B. Wells Barnett. And I don't know if y'all are familiar, some people might be, but if y'all are not familiar with Ida B. Wells Barnett, just know that she is a Black woman who's born in Mississippi, enslaved. After the 13th Amendment is passed, she leaves the South and heads to the Midwest and becomes a teacher. All right. But she's also a journalist. And specifically, she is a Black woman who is reporting on the racial lynchings that happened shortly after the Civil War. All right. So I'm going to say this again. Ida B. Wells Barnett is a Black woman who was born enslaved in Mississippi. Wait, let's go with one, Black woman born enslaved. Two, enslaved in Mississippi. Three, moves, becomes a teacher to the Midwest. Four, starts her journalism career reporting on racial lynchings when it happens. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of people talk about Ida B. Wells Barnett as if the work she was doing was archival. No, she was doing investigative reporting, meaning there's a lynching, and she goes out and she interviews the family, the friends, the community members, and possibly the white woman who may have lied on a Black man to get him murdered. And you all are invited and encouraged to look into the works that she has that are still available online. So you can actually see editorials that she's written, articles that she's written, and Sis didn't pull any punches. She was just like, Mrs. Smith, who lives on 1517 Acre Street, had sword adultery with Mr. John, and then her husband walked in, and then John was hung, right? Like, she pulled no punches. And I remember being like, okay, so Ida B. Wells called a thing what it was. I can too. And I didn't remove any words from my website. And it gave me the clarity that I needed in a moment to move forward. No judgment, because I want to be clear. For my peers who made the decision to do that, that's fine, because that was their choice. But Ida B. Wells Barnett helped me make my choice. So that's an example of how I've used my board in a moment like this, right? And so I strongly needed that to ground myself. And then, I find myself having conversations with all types of people. So, not just like, obviously, I talk to lots of Black people all the time. And I started encouraging Black folks I know, like, get an ancestral board of directors, include cultural ancestors, genetic ancestors, but let it ground you, let it give you wisdom in this moment. But then I started having that conversation with people who weren't Black and people who felt like they needed to have something stronger to ground them in what we're experiencing now. And so this study is really a result of both me seeing how helpful this tool has been to me individually, but also thinking that there are so many people who need to access this for such a time as this. The last thing I'll say here is, as volatile as this moment is, and it truly is, I cannot overstate it enough what we are experiencing and feeling every day, right? I do believe that there is a reckoning in this moment. And what I mean by reckoning is that there are these generational choices that show up. And I feel the universe gives it to us and says, are you going to handle this now? And in the context of the West, but specifically the United States, we keep getting handed the same challenge and keep failing it over and over again, right? Part of this moment is really asking specifically folks who are white bodied is, will you continue to choose whiteness to the detriment not only of yourself, not only of your communities, but to the planet, right? And this is a choice. This is an ask that has actually been made many times before, right? And so I wanted to give people the tools to have the courage to face the stuff that has been so hard. Because whether we recognize it or not, whether you are someone who identifies as Native or Black or white, especially for those of us who've lived in the United States for several generations, we are epigenetically tied to the violence of this moment. And so until we can do the real work of healing that intergenerational trauma, until we can look at some of the hard choices that our foremothers made and say, I'm going to respond to the same conflict, the same tension, but I'm going to do it in a different way, we will continue to repeat the cycles, right? Uh, and so this work is not just about having some fancy conversation about who I come from. It really is about saying, I'm going to take the opportunity to heal what my great, 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 great grandmother couldn't, to say the things my great, great grandfather couldn't say, to speak the language of my foreparents who had something rich before the violence of white supremacy. All right. So that's why I wanted to offer this. And then briefly, let me tell you a little bit about my facilitation. Okay. I cussed. I it's funny that I start from the place of, by the way, I cussed. Like that's the most important thing. I am a true academic. And so that means that I would use 70 words to describe something that could potentially just use 12 words. I'm just going to be honest with you. All right. I love history. I also love to laugh. I am someone who is I've been calling myself neuro Black lately because that feels a little sexy, but I'm neuro expansive. Um, and so I do two things easily: scroll and digress. So that's going to happen in this space. You've seen it already tonight. But then I will also like I really get into the crevices of stuff, right? And so there might be moments where this facilitation feels like it's doing a stand-up comedy routine. right? But then there will be moments where you're going to be like, wow, it feels like I'm in a college classroom, all right? And then, depending on how spicy it gets, you might feel like, damn, are we at the bar? And I'm not going to withhold any of that. So I want to be really transparent about that. Part of my commitment, once I got diagnosed with my particular types of neurodivergence, I'm just like, okay, so now I'm going to actively not mask when I don't have to. And this is one of those spaces where I'm determined not to mask at all. So let me see if there are any specific questions about my facilitation before we move forward. Here's a chance, or not even facilitation. I've said a lot of stuff so far. So let's see if anyone has any questions about any of the stuff I've said so far. Okay, you can always come back or write it down later because we'll have some discussion time. So now I've told you a little bit about my teaching style. I'm going to give you all the overview of this program. All right. So the first part starts tonight, ends in January, and we're going to be really thinking about like, what did the turn towards whiteness mean? And then how does turning away from whiteness, meaning divesting from whiteness, point us towards ancestral truth and grief? Because both of those things are important, right? And so this first 5 weeks, we're going to be centering the idea of what whiteness has deliberately broke apart. And I'm going to give you all some themes to think about whiteness as. For example, we're going to talk about whiteness as plagiarism, right? We're going to talk about like what are some of the things that whiteness has taken away from various groups of people, because it has taken things away. I think we can easily see how white supremacy has taken away things from white, excuse me, Black, Native, Indigenous, melanated people. But I don't think we always have a stronger understanding of what the project of whiteness has taken away from white folks. So we're going to spend some time really thinking about that. We're also going to create and name who are those ancestors who've had to be impacted by the project of whiteness and by white supremacy. So we're going to name some of those people. And then we're going to build our own individual grief rituals so that we can have an embodied awareness of what that grief means now and what it's meant before. Okay. Um, And so I'll give you a personal example. We understand that Black, just like white, is a racial construct that was placed upon. So Black was placed upon my ancestors, right? White was placed upon Gabby's, right? So what are those ancestral losses tied to once we became part of a racial hierarchy? Okay. That's the first part of the work. The second part, we start in February, and this is going to be eliminating anti-Blackness from your life. Oh. And so that focus is going to be on the book I created, Loving Black People, a Discipline and a Practice. And it's going to move us from our past to our current future. So what does it look like to embody an, a new choice and expand on what does it mean to see possibility in from an Afrofuturistic perspective, which is something I think all types of people, even people who aren't Black, can think through and use to model liberative praxis. All of these sessions are on Thursdays. So we meet bi-weekly, but I created 3 meetings for December. So because I work the way I work, I didn't publicize this until this week. So I'm gonna have like a take 2 of this kickoff on December 11th. You are not required to go because you're here tonight, but hopefully you might encourage other people to join us, or more people will register. And so basically, I'm gonna do a take 2 of this on the 11th, and our second meeting will be December 18th. So basically, the December 11th meeting is like a repeat of this one, right? So we're meeting. Uh, Here are the dates, and I'm gonna go ahead and put them in the chat. I am pretty time fluid, and so that means that I'm not gonna be checking like, oh, are people absent or who hasn't been here? You all are grown adults. I don't know your life story. I don't know your schedules, right? But I do want to give people the opportunity to say, oh, these are the dates. I need to put them on my calendar, that kind of thing. All right. So let's see. All right. Also, if you've ever been in a study with me, part of that time fluidity. So not only am I the person who's not going to be like harassing people to show up, but we move with the speed of where we are. And so there've definitely been workshops and book studies that I've done where I'm like, oh, we need a little bit more time, or this particular content requires so much out of us. So maybe we need to sit with it a little bit more. So even though we do have structure, I think that's important. I think routine is important. I also want you all to know that I do make adaptations for what the we is going to need in this space. All right. So right now, our plan is to end on April 2nd, but we might be in a space where we end the following week, so I just want to also be upfront about that as well. Obviously, you could be like, look, I scheduled this to end on April the 2nd. I ain't coming back. That's also okay. All right. All right. So every week, there's different lessons. We have Introduction to Whiteness as Plagiarism on December 18th. We're going to talk about scientific racism, the betrayal and silence that occurred when immigrant groups became white. We're going to talk about what does it mean to embody grief work uh, for the first couple weeks. Then we're going to move into that second part, which again is what are the tools we need to eliminate anti-Blackness from our life. So that is basically a balcony level view of what we're going to be doing the next 4 months. So I want to stop here. Again, I've said a lot of things. So before I get into today's talk, I don't want to call it a lecture. I want to see if anyone has any questions or needs any clarification about anything I've shared so far. You can also private message me if you don't want to share out loud. That's also available to you. Okay. All right, y'all. So you don't necessarily need to take notes for tonight because this is going to be recorded and available to you. In the future, you might want to have a notebook because I don't know yet if this group is going to be okay with recording certain parts. And so until I know that, I'm just going to assume we're not going to be recording. So tonight, no worries on note taking. I got you. But in the future, possibly have a notebook. So I like to start I keep switching from the term workshop to book study because it's the first time I'm doing like a combination. Usually we do one or the other in my Patreon space. So this is like an embodied workshop. There's lots of talk and there's going to be some doing attached to it. Tonight it's going to be a lot of talk, specifically because I wanted you all again to have a strong layout of the plan. And also I wanted to create shared meaning. So shared meaning is really important to me because I am a believer that just because I speak the same language as someone doesn't mean that we're not translating, right? Now, Charlotte may have an easier time picking up when I'm throwing down because Charlotte and I have been in community for years, and Charlotte has already learned how to speak Kina. But that might not be true for Alyssa. She's like, oh my gosh, this is my first time with taking a class with Kina, and I don't speak this language. All right, so that's why I start with shared meaning. Speaking of shared language, Alyssa, would you mind reading for us? I put the definition in the chat. Shared meaning.
Sure. Shared meaning is the purpose of defining terminology. The purpose of defining terminology is so that everyone is starting from the same foundational base. It refers to a common understanding or interpretation of a concept, idea, or communication between two or more individuals or groups. It occurs when multiple people come to a consensus about the meaning of something, ensuring that their understanding aligns and overlaps. This shared understanding is essential for effective communication, cooperation, and collaboration in various contexts, such as personal relationships, workplaces, communities, and cultures.
All right. So I love this example. So this fall semester, I went back to full-time teaching college students. These are interesting as a generation. All right. And I will say one of the things I appreciate about them the most is that I mean, maybe this isn't just Z's, but maybe because I'm older, now I can see it in a way that I couldn't see it when I was younger. But just, the words that they come up with for stuff, right? And so here in December 2025, if I were to say, Mary, your sweater that cooks, that's a good thing. That means I'm saying your sweater is nice looking. All right. But 25 years ago, that sentence would not have made sense because cooked just meant some shit around food. All right. But now, but then even the dynamic between let her cook versus she's cooked, that doesn't even mean the same to the Z because you want to be cooking, but you don't want to be cooked. Cooked is bad. Right? So all of these things mean different things now because we've added more cultural differences to it. All right. Now, what I will say is that for a lot of people who are new to my learning, they're like white supremacy, and I'm like, not really, all of it. And I am very consistently different than a lot of people who talk about these issues because a significant amount of my work actually isn't about white supremacy. B, I use the term whiteness um, often and separate that from supremacy culture. And so for a lot of people, that's new. So I'm not saying you need to have my understanding of these concepts. I just want you to know what I mean when I'm saying them. All right. So that means Mary Beth could be like, listen, I don't agree with how she's defining this term. It's not for me. That's okay. But I just want you all to know what I mean when I say that term. All right. So let's start with whiteness because that's actually sometimes it's been my experience that this is a new term for people. So I refer to whiteness, capital W whiteness, as a political and rhetorical construction that operates in our social systems that centers on the characteristics, experiences, and traits associated with European ancestry. This construction has real time consequences for those who are associated with it and disassociated with it. Now, this is very different than what I would call lowercase whiteness, because lowercase whiteness just refers to the process of people being racialized as white, right? So, like Gabby walks through the world as a white person, right? That's lowercase w, all right? But all types of people, including my black ass, have had investments in whiteness as a system. Now, let me prove to you what I mean by this. I have never been a white supremacist. Never in my black life have I thought that anything white was better than what I had. And so in 2016, when we see a lot of people start having more conversations about anti-racism work, I see a lot of people saying, and Black people, you've got to do with your internalized white supremacy. I'm like, the hell? Like, I was like, who are you talking to? Who over here believes that white people are better? Right? So I needed to find another way to like understand for myself, but also articulate for other people. Because there has never been a day in my Black life, this is the last day I'll be 44 on this planet, that I ever thought white was superior to anything. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. But what I did understand, so I wasn't invested in the delusion of white supremacy, but I did understand I was definitely invested in whiteness as a system. Not because I thought white ice was colder, but I took it on as a way to maneuver the earths that I walked in, the society that I lived in, right? So my hair being straight, my nails being bland, all of that wasn't because I thought white was better. It's because I needed it to survive. And so then I was like, oh, what does it mean to divest from that? So that's why I named these as two different projects. And, you know, I'm going to say this, and I know this is probably a hot take or a spicy take. Rarely met white people who think white people are better than everyone else. That's not been my experience. I'm sure that there are white people who believe that. But most of the white people I know and been in community don't believe white people better, right? So what I see is a concentration of people who are invested in whiteness as a system, and for a variety of reasons had to have an investment to make it through their everyday lives. That's why I have that conversation. The second thing I'll say here is why I don't talk a lot about white supremacy. And again, this is a spicier take. What I do is I separate these things. White supremacy is the delusion of white people being better. Whiteness is the system that centers on European ancestry, and supremacy culture, because there's supremacy culture in the Black community. It's not a thing people are talking about, but let me tell you, it exists. Supremacy culture isn't limited to a particular racial group. All right. So I separate these things, right? Now, there are certainly times where I am talking about the white supremacy project, because that's what it is. There are people typically who are white who are like, only white people matter. All right. So I hold these three things as distinct. All right. And then when we're talking about whiteness and supremacy, but also, right, the white supremacy project, here are the tenets that were created. Here are some of the tenets of whiteness that were created by a Black man. It's important to name him as a Black man, Kenneth Jones, in collaboration with Black, Indigenous people of color, and the West Coast in Cali, made popular by a white woman by the name of Thelma Akun. In case you didn't catch it, that was shade. Not created by her, because she could not have created it, but made popular. Like a lot of the things that white people steal from Black and Native folk. All right. Lots of things. We good so far? So now that I've made some distinctions, so I told you all what the definition of what I mean when I talk about whiteness. This is what I mean when I talk about supremacy culture. All right. Ashley, would you mind reading that definition in the chat for us of supremacy culture?
Yeah, sure. Supremacy culture refers to the ways political, ideological, cultural, and systemic forces work to ensure the continued oppression and domination of certain groups by maintaining false narratives of the superiority of other groups.
Okay. So that's what I mean when I say lots of different groups can be invested in a supremacy project. All right. Okay. Now, this is how I'm seeing white supremacy. Mary Beth, can you read that definition that I just put in the chat?
Yes. White supremacy delusion is an ideology where white people are believed to be superior to non-white people. This fallacy is rooted in the same scientific racism and pseudoscience used to justify slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and genocide at various times throughout history. White supremacist ideologies and their followers continue to perpetuate the myth of white racial superiority.
Okay. And again, this is what I mean when I say I've met very few people who actually hold that as an ideal. That's just been my experience. All right. Lastly, Mary, can I get you to read the definition that I just put in the chat of white racial identity?
Yep. White racial identity, embodied, is a dynamic socio-political construct that creates both individual and collective identity based on a perceived common European Caucasoid heritage.
Okay, so you'll hear me say a lot, white people, people with white racial identity, or white-bodied folk. This is what I mean by that terminology. Okay, so any questions about Kina's understanding of any of these terms? And I mean, literally, you can say, I've never heard anyone say it like this. Could you help me understand this a little bit more? Like, I have a lot of grace around that. Okay. You can also private message. All right, let's move forward. So let's start with when Brittany Janae told me white people can't create an ancestral board of directors. So, so, so Brittany Janae, my friend, who planted the seed in me to build the ancestral board of directors, we were having a conversation, and I was like, you know what? I think white folks need this too. They need an ancestral board of directors. She was like, absolutely not. And we had a series of conversations about what were the limitations and what were the struggles and what were the tensions. And I agreed. I agreed. And so let's start with why I'm saying that Charlotte and I can have ancestors and people, and not just Charlotte and I think Black and Native people and melanated people can take hold of ancestral wisdom, and by the end of this, create an ancestral board. But for white-bodied folks, lineage is the term that I'm using for y'all. A lineage board is the term that I'm going to recommend. That's the product I recommend you create. Let's talk a little bit about that. All right. So this framing that I'm giving, that ancestry and ancestors belong to Black and Native and melanated people, whereas lineages is for white folks, is not just spiritually resonant, but it's actually academically sound. For Black and Native folks, particularly on Turtle Island, the term ancestry and ancestor carries cultural memory, cosmology, and relationship. Because there was a severance that we didn't choose. If I had it my way, I would be Ghanaian. People would understand me as Ghanaian American or Nigerian American if I had it my way, but I don't, because there was a severance that happened with the transatlantic slave trade. All right. So for Black and Native people in the United States, any connection, also, let me just name this. I am someone who very much understands that Black people who've gone through epigenetically the transatlantic slave trade are also a genocided people. That is not a term that I often hear people use to refer to Black Americans like myself, but I am a part of a genocided group. I am a part of a group that has been dispossessed and displaced. Because if someone were to say to me, Mary, go back to where you came from, where would I go? That's not a rhetorical question. I'm asking that question, Mary. Where would I go?
I'm not sure that it's possible for you to know.
Yep. And the weight of that is so heavy in me all the time that I don't. Ancestry has given me some general areas, but me walking around Ghana like, hey, does this look like your nose? Right? I have no way. Right? So for Native and Black folks on Turtle Island, ancestry is so deep because there's been so many ruptures that were forced upon us in dehumanization, in genocidal projects, in displacement. So every bit of Africa that I have left, I fought to keep that. This is why I'm so joyful when I think about soul food, right? Because the history that is present in food systems really kind of highlights for me what I call African retention. You eat a bowl of jambalaya in Louisiana, and it's jollof in Nigeria. And I think, wow, my ancestors fought with everything they had to hold on to some part of that continent, despite being told that when they got on the boats, they couldn't sit by people from their same village, despite when they got to Brazil and the Caribbeans and the Americas being ripped for speaking their native tongues. We fought to keep Africa. We continue to fight, right? So that is ancestry. For white body folks, I use the term lineage because the category white was created through a disconnection that was chosen. Where's the lie? The difference between my ancestors and a lot of your ancestors is that they chose. And I'm not saying it was an easy choice, but there is agency in that choice, right? And that's the grief that you've got to hold, specifically as a white body person, is that what does it mean that my ancestors chose a lie? Rather it was a good choice, bad choice, we don't, that's a whole different conversation, but it was a choice. All right. And so that's part of the reason why the language is different. And understanding this difference is knowing that there is grief that white people had to abandon their ancestors to become white. Because whiteness doesn't preserve your histories. It doesn't uphold your foremothers' tongues. It doesn't even affirm that. Case in point, all the French people in Louisiana who were punished at school and punished in their families and punished in their communities for speaking French, because those people were told, y'all aren't French anymore, you're white now. And you better get with the program. Right? So whiteness didn't preserve the ancestry. It didn't preserve that. It took your cultural inheritance and made it property and status. That was a choice. So that's part of the reason why those are two different lanes, similar lanes, but different. Ancestry assumes continuity, kinship, and cultural rootedness. All right. That in anthropology denotes consistent kinship systems, cultural life weight passed through generations. Every day on the internet, y'all see Black people making up another line dance. And I know that it probably seems like all they do is collectively dance. But actually, it's deeply spiritual work of us staying in kinship, staying culturally connected. All right? Every time you hear a Black woman tell a story and she says, mind you, that's not just a rhetorical linguistic device, right? That's actually like, this is the language of how we tell stories as Black Americans because we had to create a whole new culture for ourselves. All right? Black and Indigenous people maintain ancestral frameworks despite rupture. So we understand that Indigenous nations have ties to homelands, to kinship. They fought when Spanish colonizers came over to be able to call themselves what they call themselves, the Pablo, to be able to call themselves the Homa, right? They fought so that another generation could potentially be able to speak the language of its foremothers. They fought for that. All right? They didn't exchange it for the lie. All right? Some of the source material here, in case you all want to do more reading, right? I'm going to put in the chat. Also, I've done the reading for y'all, and so I don't want, like, don't take this on as like additional homework, but I just want you all to see that I'm not making this up. All right? So Leif Merlings talks about ancestral continuity. Sylvia Winter talks about the afterlife of the rupture of the transatlantic slave trade. Ryan DeLorean Jr. In his book God is Red talks about indigenous belonging being tied to land and cosmologies. So there have been a lot of people who have named, their work has named some of the things that I just amplified with y'all. All right, so I'm going to put that in the chat. Again, no pressure. I just want you to know that I'm not making shit up. Another reason why we're using different terminology here is because the category white people was created through severance. All right. And so I've shared this story in Patreon a lot, but for my newcomers, I'm going to share this with you. A couple years ago, I was watching television and it was a commercial for Ancestry.com. And it was like, get your DNA kit and then learn where you're from, da 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 da. And all of a sudden, it was like I was situated in my second grade classroom. My teacher's name was Miss Milano. I do not remember what about that day, that lesson was so permanent in my brain, but it was. So I saw the Ancestry commercial about get in contact with your ancestry, get the kit today, blah, 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 Ellis Island. And it immediately brought me back to Miss Milano's second grade classroom. I remember her talking about her Italian great-great-grandparents who fled Italy and came to the United States. And she was telling us, and again, who knows why Miss Milano was saying this to a group of second graders? Who knows? All right. Maybe that's why I remembered it, because maybe my second grade brain was like, why is she doing this? I'm not really sure. But, oh, I know why she was telling us, because we were going to take a field trip to Ellis Island. There, that's it. So she was telling her about her ancestor who had came through Ellis Island. And I remember her just being so joyful about it, right? Even to the extent that she told us, like, their name was shortened. And I don't remember, like, all of how she shared that was like, this was the best thing. My ancestors came here from afar and they got through Ellis Island and they made new lives for themselves. And it wasn't till that day that I saw the Ancestral.com, the Ancestry commercial, that I was like, oh shit. People talk about Ellis Island like it's a site of triumph, but really it is a site of deep grief and trauma. And people should probably frame it like that. Because to have walked in with ethnic story and heritage and a beautiful 17-letter last name, and to have left that place devoid of all of that, and then telling generations of your Italian children that they cannot speak Italian, that is something worth grieving, not celebrating. So part of understanding this moment is recognizing what was given up: ethnic identities, kinship ties, land-based cosmologies. And I got to give it to the Irish people who live in Ireland. They are quick to remind you white Irish folks over here. Like, you come from generations of people who were witches, who did witch shit. What are you talking about? All right. So I'm here for it. I'm here for the spiciness. So all of those old identities, those rich identities, were dissolved to enter the political category of white. And so this is why we often understand that white ancestry is not cultural. So the through line of lineage really means a chain of inheritance, property transmission, social capital attached to bloodlines, racialized hierarchies maintained through generations, and legal structures. One of the things we're going to talk about, so I named one already, like whiteness is plagiarism. One of them is going to be like whiteness as legal property. So whiteness preserves lineages, not ancestors, whereas an ancestor is about a relational accountability. And lineage implies transmission, transactions. Some source material here: Theodore Allen, The Invention of the White Race, White Race, Whiteness of Racing, Old World Ethnic Identities, Cheryl Harris, Whiteness as Property. Again, just so you can know that I'm grounding this in research, not just saying shit that sounds good to my imagination. About to put that in the chat. And the last reason why we're using ancestry for Black, Native, and melanated folks, and lineage for white folks. Ancestors implies a relational accountability, whereas whiteness has historically rejected that accountability. So when I call someone an ancestor, it is a claim of obligation, of relationship, of reciprocity, of memory stewardship, and a moral entanglement. This is why you hear Black people say things like, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. All right? It is a callback to African cosmologies, African ancestral veneration, right? Similar to Native people who have ceremony around ancestral presence, right? So again, Black, Native, melanated folks call upon the ancestors because we want to be in relationship. Whereas by contrast, what we often see with white-bodied folks is a disavowal, right? What are the ways in which we want to minimize the ethnic relationality and maximize the new hierarchy that replaced ethnic story? So under the colonial projects that have existed, especially in the West, you saw white people like replacing language. Like, so for example, now we're talking about forefathers, right? Who were like who are your ancestors on the pilgrim, the pilgrims or whatever like that. There was the purposeful forgetting of the violence of their ancestors, which led to broken kinship, which then was replaced with racial hierarchy. So that's not ancestry, that is lineage. The source material here, Sandaya Hartman, Lose Your Mother, Christina Sharp in the Wake, The Relational Responsibility of Being Dead in Black Life, Taya Miles, All That She Carried, Ancestral Retention Through Black Maternal Lines. Again, no pressure for you all to get these books or read these books, but I just wanted you to be grounded in the same kind of source material that I'm using to structure our conversation. Okay. White lineage is defined by legal inheritance, property transfer, status transmission, maintaining racial purity. If there's genealogical record keeping, oftentimes it's to prove whiteness, to prove status, to prove racial hierarchy. And to keep that social capital project passed down from generation to generation. So in summation, I can't say summation. Why can't I say that word? In summary, all right, probably because I've said a lot of words. Ancestry implies relational context and culture. Lineage implies hierarchy. All right. So I said all of that stuff just to say that. All right. So again, I might have shared new information with folks, or maybe not new information, but just challenging information. So I want to give you an opportunity to seek clarity now, ask questions, share thoughts, feelings, observations. No one? Everyone's like, okay, totally got it. Same page. Keep it going.
I'm curious, and maybe this is something that you're about to talk about or you talk about later, but you said that we'll be creating like these ancestry or lineage boards. So, is a lineage board just like your genetic or family ancestors, or? Okay.
We're going to get more into the different types of ancestors.
Gotcha.
Certainly, there are some that are genetically tied. But we're going to figure out what is a thoughtful, sensitive way for folks to call in cultural connection as well. Okay. I will say, Michelle, I want to be really clear because I actually saw this on the internet, and I just, if I had a fight with every time I saw some white person do some shit, I would like someone called, I think they referred to Coretta as their ancestor. I was like, absolutely not. And I remember thinking, white people just won't let Black people have anything at all. Okay. So we're going to figure out even how you can name cultural ancestors without culturally appropriating. Okay. Does that answer your question, Michelle?
Yeah, sorry. My partner just got home and the dog is freaking out.
Okay, no worries. I just wanted to make sure I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So, ancestors, dignity, survival wisdom, refusal of erasure. Where else lineage can be understood as a system of inheritance. All right.
Can I,
Yes.
I think I'm trying to kind of figure out, because I think there are some, I guess I'm not talking about appropriating um, Black ancestors to what would be a board, like a board of directors, but actually people who are in my lineage.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And so I for good or for ill, they're what I got. Do you know what I'm saying? And so and they're sort of a mixed bag. You know what I'm saying? And so I guess I don't, some of them, as individuals, they kind of sucked, and that's fine. But there's a few of them that actually, you know, had qualities that I think are worth pulling forward because they managed to, you know, let me throw out an example because I don't quite know how to, my mother wasn't born here. She was born in Italy. She managed to survive World War II and get here. And how she did that, I'll be damned if I know. But the fact that she managed to not die and come here, and managed to survive the woman who adopted her, my adopted grandmother, she survived her as well. I guess there's qualities that my mother had that are worth bringing forward. I how does that, I don't, um, um, that's something that I think is inheritable. Does that make I'm trying to figure out,
Of course. Yeah, Mary. And I'm going to generalize this, right? Because I don't want to seem like I'm making any kind of personal slights. So when we think about that great migration of Irish folks who came to the Americas slowly starting around 1920s, they were quite literally surviving a genocidal project. Okay. So millions of their family members, their community members starved to death. The kind of resilience it takes to say, I'm going to leave where I've always lived, the land of all of my grands, get on a boat and come to a new place. That ought to actually be celebrated. That is a tremendous undertaking to do. I don't even want to move. Part of my apartment, there are rooms in my apartment that can't get electricity. And I have just been like, it's fine. The places that I spend most of my time do, because I don't want to move. So, heck yes, let's acknowledge the tremendous thing that occurred. And also, which is why the nuance is important, when they got here and had to live in Black neighborhoods and got treated like Black people, because there was hatred and prejudice because they weren't even the right type of whites.
Yes.
They weren't the right type of religion,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to look at some of that language.
Mm-hmm.
And then they chose a particular path.
Yeah.
Both of those things can be held.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not, and please don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting that um, those two situations are anywhere similar, because nobody snatched those folks out of their lives and stuck them on a boat and you know ripped their culture, tried to rip their culture from them. That's not the same. And so I'm not,
Yeah.
don't misunderstand that I'm making them similar. They're not. I just was,
No, I don't think you
I
are.
was pointing out that just it's not my desire to appropriate the ancestry of Black people,
Yeah.
kind of a thing.
No, and us learning how to hold the nuance of this is important. On my end, we know that there were African people who sold other Africans.
Mhm.
And as hell, that could be a part of my bloodline.
But that was about survival, was it not? It was about trying to survive so that,
I mean, it's complicated as hell, Mary.
yeah.
Some of those choices weren't just survival choices.
Yeah.
And it's, even as I say it, it like makes me cringe that there were like African kings who did make that decision.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going to learn together how to hold all the nuances. All right? Lastly, I'll say that I'm making this distinction because I do want to protect the sacredness of, again, especially on Turtle Island, the choices that Black and Native people have made to stay connected to our ancestral cosmologies, while also situating the fact that people who are right-bodied do have actual historical truth that they need to reckon with and take responsibility for. So there's that. All right. Are there any other questions before I get ready to cut off the recording and we get into some discussion? Anything that needs to get clarified, repeated, broken down? All right. Yeah, Charlotte. So, I'm going to respond to the comment. So, from what I've learned, and I'm still learning a lot, Sadar Hartman's work has been really helpful, is that you had some African tribal leaders who certainly made that choice. Okay, so first of all, let's just name this. Chattel slavery was not the first type of human trafficking that existed. All right. But what it was is the first type of human trafficking that is race-based and generational. All right. So those are the distinctions, right? It's important to name that. So even prior to colonizers coming to Africa, right, you had African tribal leaders who did enslave people from the next village. All right. A lot of that was about debt. It was like, I sold you 15 goats. You couldn't pay me back. I'm going to have your kid be my servant for 3 years. And then I'm going to return them back to you. But sometimes the servant decided to stay in the village. All right. That happened. And that kind of transaction happened outside of colonial violence. All right. But what the transatlantic slave trade did, initiated by the Portuguese, because I can't say this enough, that I feel like people at Portugal and Spain just like walk around and be like, oh, what, we never, right? So let's name it that the first huge slave holding castle that is created in the continent, I can't think of the country right now, I think it is Ghana, was created by the Spanish. Portuguese were the first people to show up to Africa and be like, y'all got all this shit. All right. So there was the kind of enslavement that happened outside of colonial violence, and then because of colonial violence. Okay. That's the distinction. Charlotte, is that helpful? Do you need me to expand or anything?
No. Thank you. And that's kind of, you said it much more eloquently. I actually, I don't know their names. It was a show I was watching on the Africa channel. Two Ghanaian professors, women were talking about that time frame, and they said specifically that what you said, Kina, that there were some people or groups that would enslave others, and a lot of times, honestly, it was more women, and it was more so to kind of like have somebody else take care of the household. And another layer of difference was it wasn't generational, and eventually you could actually, the kids would become a part of the household. If she had any children, those children became a part of the family. It wasn't this otheriness. So that's kind of what I was trying to say too. I feel like the folks that I would believe, I think that anybody who was okay with saying, okay, you can take these people and take them across the ocean, right, to the Americas, could not have in any stretch comprehended what they were really sending them off to do. Right. Because if they already had an understanding of their version of slavery, they would probably think, well, y'all are going to do the same thing we do. Right.
Yeah.
So
I don't know, but we actually have proof, Charlotte. And again, this goes back to the nuance. All of these things have so many layers. We actually now have some proof that some of those kings, and let's name the patriarchy.
Another thing.
But
yeah. Like you said, nuance, a lot of nuance.
There's nuance. Yeah. Because some of them have been a part of when the human trafficking of Africans becomes operational. Right? And so what I mean by operational is that now we have processes that guide this, right? So there's Almina Castle. There, you see what I'm saying? Like at this point, some of those kings very much knew what was happening.
Sure.
They knew they were sending Africans away who would never come back. They knew exactly the type of shit that the colonizers were going to be doing. And we can't pretend that away. Yep. And we're in sad season, and I definitely can't not tell the truth about that shit. Right? Agreed. But what I do think it's important to name is we still can't make it just seem, because this is what I do get frustrated about. People like, and Africans sold Africans, and they just flatten it out. And completely because here's the thing, at the end of the day, if the colonizers never showed up talking about, give me your humans, then there would be no humans to be trafficked.
Right. Yeah.
So there were kings that supplied the demand. Mm-hmm. But the demand still had to be made.
Human poaching.
All right. If colonizers were like, oh, this is cool, now we're going to go back where we came from. But that's not what happened. Okay? All right. I'm going to stop the recording here.